أهلا وسهلا فيكم مرة ثانية، وموضوعنا عن المدن الجديدة الحاضنة للمساحات الثقافية، كيف يبدو المستقبل. معانا في هذه الفقرة الأستاذة علياء الداود، مؤسسة استوديو علياء الداود والموجود في الرياض. يعتمد على العلاقة المتعددة التخصصات بين التمدن والطبيعة والهندسة المعمارية. تخرجت علياء من الهندسة المعمارية من جامعة سانت مارتينيز والمدرسة المملكية للرسم في لندن. نجد أعمالها في مجموعات خاصة، منها تلك الخاصة بأمير ويلز. خلال دراساتها الجامعية ساعدت علياء في تدريس وحدات التصميم المعماري في جامعة ويستمنستر في لندن. أهلا وسهلا علياء.
Shukran Reem. Thank you, Reem. And good afternoon, everyone. I'm Alia Dawood, and I'd like to welcome you to our talk on creative spaces, what type of architecture and urban planning are best suited to support the cultural industry as it grows. I'm delighted to introduce our esteemed panel today, who all in their practice deal directly with the themes of culture, identity, and architecture. Joining us from the Ministry of Culture is the CEO of the Architecture and Urban Planning Commission, Dr. Sumaya Al-Sulaiman. Prior to her role at the Ministry of Culture, she was the Dean of the College of Design at Imam Abdulrahman bin Faisal University in Dammam. She holds a PhD from Newcastle University. Her professional research work touches upon the intersection between architecture and politics, ideologies and nation building in architectural practice, and regionalism within modernism. We're equally delighted to welcome Dr. Noura Abdulrahman Ghabra, who is a sustainability consultant and academic at the King Abdul Aziz University in Jeddah. Ghabra holds a PhD in architecture and is a lead green associate. Currently, her professional research direction is geared towards human-centric design solutions that aim to enhance the quality of the built environment through observing different scales, not only at the scale of the building, but also the macro scale. Finally, joining us from the UAE is Wael Al-Awad, who is the founding partner of the international architecture, landscape, and urban design firm Weiwei. Weiwei was formerly known as Ibda'a Design and was founded in 2009 in Dubai. The firm has a multidisciplinary approach to design, always looking to challenge the conventional processes. Currently, Weiwei has offices in Dubai and another in Tokyo. Thank you for joining us today, and thank you in advance for your time. Just before I kick off, I'd like to say a couple of things on how wonderful it is to see such a panel like this, where we have academics, architects, client representatives. So it's really an opportunity to hear from you across the board on this topic of culture and how to deal with it through the architectural practice. So in today's open dialogue, we'd like to discuss the following topics. So the relationship between cultural spaces and their community, the issue of cultural space and accessibility. So accessibility in terms of people's rights to cultural space. And finally, we'd like to touch upon the discourse that should be taking place between the client and the architect when working on generating new cultural spaces in the kingdom. So my first question is rather a wide one, and it asks, how can we make and support culture in the context of Saudi Arabia today? So what's our role as practitioners? What's our role as clients, academics, in creating successful infrastructure for a diverse cultural landscape? And I'd like to maybe begin by asking Dr. Sumaya to answer or give us her thoughts on this point.
Well, thank you so much, Alia. Also, thank you to the MISC Art Week organizers. It's a great pleasure really to be part of this panel. I think, being at the Ministry of Culture, responsible for the Architecture and Design Commission, I think one thing that became very apparent from the get-go is basically this idea that, is culture something that is produced, or is culture something that you can add, to a building? So do we have, cultural spaces, or can we take a space that is, let's say a bland, generic one, and then infuse it with culture? And if you start thinking about this kind of relationship between culture and architecture, I think what becomes apparent is, do we produce spaces of production or spaces of consumption? And to me, culture is a lot more than consumption. I think, it's where it's this cumulative expression of individuals or communities where, you get identity in several different forms. And when it comes down to architecture, is this question of, how do you make that happen? How do you bring people together in a way that is meaningful? Do you show, pristine buildings and spaces where, the production, the outcome is there, but without actually having, let's say, an interaction around it? Or do you go the other way? And I think, this kind of dual way of thinking about architecture, it's going to be really important when it comes to thinking about architecture in relation to culture. And I'm actually just going to stop here because I just want to throw that out here because I find that extremely problematic. Often we get, perhaps, different clients coming in and saying, can we, culture this space up a little bit? And, the question is always, what does that actually mean? Whereas the messy part where, have this exploration for me is so much more exciting, I think. But then, the issue of accessibility, as you mentioned, becomes very limited because usually that is much more limited to the artists, the cultural producers, and so on. So having that kind of dual relationship, how can we join these two models together in a way that makes it, an iterative process that is much more inclusive? So instead of actually answering with an answer, I'm opening this up much more as a question, perhaps to the other panelists.
Yes, so absolutely. I think, like you mentioned, a cultural space is both a space for production where culture can be produced, but also a space where culture can be showcased. In the former, it is more of an act space, totally agree. And in the latter, it's more of a static space. In terms of designing for this, I wonder maybe Wael can give us some insight into how we may design for these two different types of spaces, how the community can interact with these two types of spaces.
Yes, thank you, Alia, for the introduction, and thank you, MISC Art Week, for this lovely platform and conversation. And I'll jump right in. I've worked on the Jameel Art Center in Jeddah, High Creative Hub, and I think that we learned a lot from there. And I totally agree with Dr. Sumaya that it's all about creating these dialogues and conversations, and this is the process of production is what generates culture and brings people together. An art piece alone does not have any impact, but an art piece with people around it, actually each having their own opinion towards it and engaging in a critical conversation, produces culture, in my opinion. Also, I mean, for High Creative Hub, it was important for us to have this. Probably you've all seen the design. It should be opening soon, I hope, in the next couple of months. And we have this huge, lovely courtyard in the middle, and it terraces up onto the 3 stories, where it forces everyone in the morning to see everyone. I mean, there's no way you can get to your space without having to walk in the middle of the courtyard and interact with all your neighbors and with all the people. And the lovely thing is the diversity of the program that also generates more culture. So there's a cinema, there's a comedy club, there's art galleries and exhibitions, as well as artist studios where they produce art. So all of these creates different activities that I think are very important in cultural spaces, and they are what we should be looking towards in the 21st century moving forward. That's my take on it. I think
absolutely. So if we just move forward, and just taking from what you've just described, maybe this question can be directed to Dr. Noura Ghabra, and it relates to the everyday spaces of cultural practice. So spaces, for example, can be seen as successful if they're creating conditions which actions can take place, as we've just heard, rather than us attempting to control the outcome of what that cultural space could be. So how do you think, in terms of your practice, how we can cultivate everyday cultural spaces in Saudi today, how we can make them grow, and how we can foster creative communities in Saudi today?
Well, thank you very much, Alia, for your question, and thank you, Misk Art Institute and Misk Art Week for this invitation. It's an honor to be amongst the panelists. Well, the thing is, what Dr. Sumaya and Mr. Wa'el started about accessibility and how to make those spaces accessible, not only in terms of physical accessibility where they can access them, but also in terms of financial, in terms of cognitive accessibility, if we want to talk about that. Like, for example, I'm not here to judge or anything, but if we talked about Al Hay, because it's just next to our Jamil, just next to where I live. So the project itself is a piece of art, it's an art state. But when you talk about how you can enter that site, how you can bring people in, how you can interact, how you can make people interact, and how you can make it a livable space, then that's where the questions come in. Is this space really accessible for everyone or not? Also, I've always thought about the community engagement part, and how those centers are they responding to the community, and is there any like exercises prior to initiating them to really involve many aspects of not only the people who lives in that space, but also the people who will be coming there, and the people who will be operating these spaces, and then how it will impact the area around it. So I do believe that these hubs are central and they're really important, but we can also move these cultural spaces to a bigger prospect when we talk about schools, for example, when we talk about universities, when we talk about spaces that got an everyday impact on the life of the citizens, when we talk about central libraries or public libraries. So it's not only a cultural hub where cool people can gather around and express their art or their initiatives, but also how you can bring everyone from the smallest on the city to from the smallest or youngest in the city to the eldest on a daily basis, literally. So this is how I always think about it. Like when I talk about, for example, university, when I reflect on on Abdulaziz University, does it got the campus culture, the truest sense of a campus culture? Well, everyone can come there. You find diversity. You find like all the ingredients that will cultivate the cultural impact and that will enhance it. So yeah. So this is how I see it.
No, that's very interesting. So one of the points that you mentioned, correct me if I'm wrong, is that it's not about a specific typology within the city.
Yes.
It's about looking at an infrastructure on an urban scale.
Yeah.
For cultural integration and cultural cultivation. Yes. So it's not necessarily looking at how the architect will design a typology fit for a cultural space, but we need to look more on an urban scale.
Yes. Yeah. I think, yeah, exactly. Yeah. You've summarized it much better than I did.
No, but it was very insightful. I mean, you had more points as well. But so I'd like to revert that back to Wa'el to counter answer this, and please explain if there were ways that you designed into spaces, or you think of future spaces perhaps as well. Prior to this call, we were discussing a space that you're working on in Saudi where there was community engagement, because it is a tricky topic.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, it's all about decentralizing also. You don't want to centralize activity. Yeah. So on an urban level, it's much healthier to decentralize all this activity in terms of, art centers, libraries. You don't want to have one library in the middle of the city that everyone comes to. You want to have smaller libraries in communities that, they feel this is part of their everyday life. And that is important, I think, similarly to universities or schools, where they can connect to that daily. And we are also working on a project in Khobar, for the Council of Social Responsibilities of the Eastern District. And actually that was an existing building that was built on the Corniche. And actually that building was the community center for the neighborhood. So they would do their afrah there, their weddings, etc., etc. And then, the building lost a lot of its activity and just became an empty shell. So the Council of Social Responsibilities started thinking, what can we do to bring it back to life and engage it within the community? So what we are doing actually is that we are creating artist spaces where they can produce art. So they can go there to actually work on carving, sculptural work, on painting, on writing even, and drawing. And then there's a park that's attached to it that's 20,000 square meters. So all their work gets exhibited in that park. So again, it becomes really part of the community. And every time I go there, the neighbors come, they want to know more and more what we are doing. And they have always an opinion that I have to listen to and enjoy listening to, because they see things better than we do. We see things from our own perspective, but they see things from their daily perspective. And we have to listen to that. And this is how a project becomes sustainable. This project then will last 50 years, not 5 years. And then, where it becomes an alien within a community where no one feels any attachment to it. And the success is always building an attachment to whoever is gonna live and use that space. And that's my answer to your question. And
that's great, and it leads me nicely to my next question for Dr. Sumaya Suleiman specifically, because I wonder, how important is it for us as residents to feel ownership over cultural spaces, spaces which showcase work, so spaces like museums, libraries, galleries? There is sometimes a distant relationship between the citizen and these spaces. And how do you, through your work, try to bridge that gap? Do you feel that there should be an ownership between, for us to feel towards these spaces?
Mm-hmm. Yes, I think that's an excellent question. And I'm going to try and tie it in also with what my colleagues have mentioned. I think, when we look at culture in general, whether it's, production or consumption, or actually just, getting to know, let's say, what's out there, I think it is really all about gaps. So for instance, now when we look at, let's say, the landscape, the cultural landscape, the ecosystem. So you look at, the supply, you look at the demand, you look at what kind of enabling factors there are out there. And oftentimes we find that, there's a lot of effort on the one side, but then, it gets to a point where, at the second stage, nobody really picks it up, let's say. And I think culture is sometimes, a word that can be a little scary for some people who don't necessarily feel that, this is kind of, their forte in a way, even if it is just, let's go and look at something. So you'll have a lot of people, perhaps being ridiculed about, when they go and appreciate art, for instance, because, their colleagues or friends just don't understand, what the appeal might be. So for instance, when it comes to the Ministry of Culture, there's, for instance, program related to actually the introduction of arts and culture within K-12 education. So really making sure that, we catch children early, we allow them to express themselves, we educate them on certain forms to really find themselves. And I think, it's not culture as a standalone. I think, culture is something that is from us. Many of the spaces, I think, where culture is portrayed, I think are felt as if they're kind of off limits, or maybe, perhaps too sophisticated for many people to actually go in. And, it doesn't really have that kind of appeal, the mass appeal, I think, that we're looking for anyway. Now, the smaller, more intimate, let's say, ownership that Wael, for instance, was talking about when it comes to this community engagement, people actually coming in, I think that's a really good way of, bringing people into the smaller parts and making it actually all about community. The question becomes always, who is this community? And again, how inclusive are they? I'm actually going to draw maybe a little bit of a parallel from innovation districts. And to actually create an innovation district, for instance, where, you have a lot of ideas, you have production, whether, it's R&D, it's research, it's very academic, or even, it could be cultural and artistic. There, what you actually do have is what you mentioned before, and Dr. Noura also mentioned, is, you have the urban scale. When it comes to inclusivity, what they actually do is they create a certain formula where to make a neighborhood inclusive, it means that you have to provide, perhaps housing for smaller or smaller families, as well as, the bigger families. You have to have a good mix of the companies, the academics, you have to have, cultural institutions, that kind of thing. So it's actually these serendipitous moments where, you have a lot of meeting within a compact space, where then you do have diversity. That's where, all the magic happens in a way. And a lot of the times when we look at neighborhoods and you kind of just put in, a building and say, here you go, do something with it. It falls flat. And I think it's the same with the parks within the neighborhood. So I think it is a much more structural struggle that we have to actually activate these spaces. Starting with the community is definitely, the best way to go. But then also making sure that, that community is not really, a kind of a closed off club, but rather, a space that is very friendly and open and still allows for others to join and really kind of, cross-pollinate ideas. So that's my take on that.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I just want to bring us back to our present day, because this year we've witnessed a lot of us work remotely. We're now all speaking very remotely. Different parts of Saudi, Wael is from the UAE, calling us in from the UAE. And I can't help but think that this year has affected this cultural scene very much. And in light of this, so this question is probably twofold. In light of this, how important do you feel a cultural space has to be physically present? So for creatives, it gives them this sense of constancy, that there is always a space for them. And so how important do you think that is? Or are we as a society inevitably moving towards a more remote way of working? And is there a positive or a negative with that? So within your practices, because we are coming in from lots of different fields, maybe Dr. Noura can start answering this question for us, from your experience of this year and how this has affected your practice.
Of course, I think education got the strongest hit from the COVID, and everyone feels that with the online teaching and the e-learning process. So I would say, of course, it affected it deeply. But we're also very lucky because with the new technologies, with all the tools and all the e-learning process. If you want to talk about the learning on the learning scale or on the knowledge scale, we weren't really impacted because you can deliver this knowledge through the means of of online tools. But if you talked about skills and how you can deliver them, then especially on the cultural scene, then maybe that is challenging, and having a physical space is, I think it's essential to have a physical space, and just to try to bridge this gap and to move the knowledge into practice. If it's online, then it's really challenging. But on the other hand, I think the online in itself, the virtual reality in itself is producing a different culture. When we talk about social media and how every application, Snapchat, Instagram, Twitter, how they all created a certain culture within them that we can never, and that TikTok, that's a whole new wave of cultural impact. So again, there is definitely a huge impact on the knowledge base. It's actually the virtual world actually helped more. We can such a panel like this one, it's accessible for thousands of people, maybe millions of people, while before it was just only confined to the physical world. But on the skill side, I think it's really challenging and I think we really need a physical space. But I would really love to hear the opinion of my colleague as well about that.
No, absolutely. I think I agree with the production of culture. It has taken a hit, perhaps, because, artists need other artists. Artists need to see, be open and engage with other artists as well, and creatives in general. Dr. Sumaya, how has this affected the Commission, and how important do you think physical spaces are, or should we be looking at more of an infrastructure to design that cultivates culture for the kingdom today?
So I think, talking about the Commission, perhaps there wasn't really much of an impact because there was no before. So basically, I joined at the end of April, and so we've been working a little quietly, really creating, hopefully, what by the end of this year will be an extremely exciting strategy that will come out to the creative industries, spanning, architecture, urban design, and the planning. We've got landscape architecture, interior design, we've got graphic design, and then also industrial design. So we're preparing, the strategy for that. In terms of programming, because of COVID, obviously it was very limited, when we had, ideas of what we could do. And I think it's a little bit of a blessing in disguise. I keep thinking about, who actually produces culture and, or, as in artists, and how do we look at ourselves when it is, extroverts versus introverts. And I think, it actually is an interesting way of looking at, let's say, the people. And I remember this, I think it was a meme saying, to all the introverts out there, I know you're doing fine, just go check on your extrovert friends because, they're not. And I just felt, I don't know, to be honest, I don't know where I stand. I'm an introverted extrovert maybe, but I completely changed the way I looked at the world, I think, and I think even for artistic, production in a way, there's a great value when it comes to actually looking inwards, or, how, great works of art actually come from suffering and that kind of thing. So I just wanted to put that out there because we may not have seen it yet, but to be honest, there might actually be something, that a lot of introverts maybe out there who have not really had a lot of space to come forward might actually share, at the end of, all of this, pandemic and everything attached to it. So, I'm secretly hoping, that we'll see amazing things. And maybe that this is actually a space where, instead of only the loud people who are always out there getting exposure, that maybe this is actually, a chance for, mail in your, your artwork. Let's look at it, and something like that in a very, in a way that's not very scary. And who knows what might come out of it. So yeah, that's just the thought there.
It's positively optimistic. I love that. Any final words on this topic?
Yeah, I think, culture is art, but it's also music, and it's also food, and it's so many things that it depends. Each thing you look at has needs its space, or does it needs its space. So there's pros and cons to each of them. But, I believe that the internet is not a place, it's a tool. So I'm still a strong believer in place and space, and connecting people together physically is much more powerful than virtually. But yet I'm from a generation that this is all new to us, right? The other generation feel more comfort in this space, probably this virtual space. So interesting times, and I do stay very optimistic. Yet we did struggle as an architect. You want to build models, you want to look at them, you need your team, you want to talk to your team. So in being locked down becomes really difficult to really practice architecture the way we're used to practicing it. And that gives us comfort in making sure we can deliver excellent projects. In Dubai now it's open, so we are in our comfort space. I am in the lab at SFCAL, so it's good. I think hopefully things will normalize.
Yeah, or at least a new normal. Thank you so much. We do have a question from the floor, and the question is from Samah Shahid. The question is overlapping a library and a public park a good idea to increase access? So I think our discussions about public realm and accessibility have really inspired people to ask this question. I open it to the panel, whoever would love to answer this.
I might take a stab at this. So I know of a very fun way of combining, a public library and a park. And I think that was in Ljubljana. And they actually had this concept, library under the trees. And basically what that was is just crates of books and, lawn chairs. But other than that, there was nothing. I mean, now when we look at the library of the 21st century, we think of it much more as, a repository of books. So it is actually a cultural space. And I can tell you that, even internally within the Ministry of Culture, we've had discussions, do we call them houses of culture, where, maybe you have a small music room, you have workshop spaces, you have all the different places where communities can come together. So in the one sense, yes, a park, definitely very accessible, very few boundaries. I mean, we still, unfortunately, do have some parks with fences around them. However, I think that's definitely, an accessible area. But does it actually do what the library of the 21st century has to do? To be honest, I'm not sure. So it may definitely be worth trying. And I think, all these, grassroots initiatives at the community level are something that is, tried and tested, may work in one location, may not work in another. So I don't think there's, one rule for those. But, if you ever do have that, a trial, then I'd love to hear about the results of it.
Yes, I think, exploring these ideas in the context of Saudi cities is very interesting. And like you said, it doesn't take much. It could be just very, very simple interventions that attract a population to use the space. I agree. On that note, I'd like to thank our panelists today for their time, and it's been very inspiring to hear from you all. And a special thanks to MISC Art Week for curating the Creative Forum. Just a note to the audience that there are 2 more days of talks, which you can tune into online or watch physically if you are in Riyadh. Thank you everyone for your time, and I hope to speak to everyone very soon.
Thank you very much.